Ha'okolas. This is Bear Wolf, Poet AF. I'm a poet, writer, musician. I've been accused of being a teacher, and you are listening to The Written Scene.
Hello and welcome to The Written Scene. My name is Adam Greenfield. I am the host, and today's guest is someone that I have known for a few years. Met him online, dragged him out to California, specifically San Diego, and have zero regrets. And I think the community would agree. So I am really glad that we finally are doing this. I think I've known him probably longer than I've been doing this podcast, so it's about damn time, right? So, Bear, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for having spaces like this, because it's spaces like this that keep poets alive, literally.
Yeah, it's I try to make sure that I get as many different kinds of writers on here, but I've been doing and I've been writing poetry as long as I've been writing prose. So to me, having all kinds of writers on here is important, especially poetry. I want to start with some current stuff. You are currently teaching at Miramar. Is that correct?
Okay. San Diego Miramar College.
All right. What have you learned about yourself as a writer through teaching writing?
Ooh, good first question.
We're
wow.
Right out the gate, friend.
The importance of concrete details. And I know that I teach this. I teach composition, critical thinking, research writing. And one of the most difficult things to get people to understand is the basic theory of show me, don't tell me. Whether it be an essay, a novel, a short story, a song, poem, whatever, we have a tendency, especially as writers, because we are abstract. We're abstract thinkers. We're abstract seers. We're, constantly looking for the deeper meaning in everything. So we have a tendency when we write to think that people know what's going on in our head just because we're putting it into words.
Right.
And that is not always the case. I actually was in a writing workshop recently with Billy Tuggle, amazing poet from Chicago, and I read what I had workshopped, and he said, as usual, Bear, you know what you're doing, but I don't see what you're saying. Like, I understand what you're saying, but I don't see what you're saying. And that really pushed that idea, and it reminded me that this is what I'm teaching all the time, so I need to do it more myself.
Practice it yourself. Yeah.
It's
hard to see it when you're doing it, but when it's pointed out, it's very obvious. Like when I have like a friend read a story and they're like, well, this part, and I'm like, ugh, how did I not see that? And so I go back in and I fix it. But I'm thinking having that reminder, especially when you're teaching others to do it, that you have to do it yourself, is probably pretty good.
Absolutely. And the thing that's nice about, again, you're going to get all the old teacher tropes, I'm sure.
Heard them before here.
The more you teach, the deeper you start to understand what it is you're teaching. I mean, the quickest way to find a deep understanding of something is to try and teach it to someone else. So the more that I teach this idea, not just of writing and the details, but also just trying to find the bigger picture, trying to guide your readers or your listeners to that bigger picture and not drag them or not force them or not push them into it. Because I think as writers, especially writers like myself, and there's a lot of others out there that are in-your-face type of writers,
yeah,
we forget that if you really want your audience to listen, you have to bring them with you. And that's one of the most important things with when you're doing the concrete details. You need to do something where not just they feel what you're feeling, but they see what you're seeing, they hear what you're hearing, etc.
Do you ever worry that the more you get into teaching, the more creativity you might lose?
It's just time.
Yeah.
It's really what it comes down to. It's time.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I recently did the math, which I should not have done.
Never do math.
Never do math. And the amount of hours that I put into just grading and reading student stuff, like I get to read 1, maybe 2 books a year that I want to read.
You want to read, yeah.
And that's over Christmas break or over, summer break.
Right.
And I like to travel, so I'm traveling a lot, so I don't get to read, but the more I just don't have time.
Yeah.
Like I have all these bits and pieces of like a line here, a couple of sentences here, a paragraph here, a micropoem here, and it might be on my computer at work, it might be on my computer at home, it might be, and so it comes down to just time.
Yeah. I've talked to a lot of teachers here and a lot of academics, and I've often wondered if having being so immersed in that studying of something, you lose the creative aspect of yourself and the ability to expand and try different things, or even break some of the rules, and try something that you're told you shouldn't do, but do it anyway, and I don't know at what point that happens, or even if it does, but I've often wondered if that actually happens for teachers.
I mean, with anything else in life, it just depends on the person.
Yeah.
It depends on where they're coming from, where they're trying to go
And that
to.
time thing.
And the time thing.
Yeah.
But I mean, I will always find ways to be creative. Like even if I'm sitting there grading papers, I'll take a break and pick up my guitar and like play a song or two.
Right.
Or
palette cleanser.
Yeah, but even in the way I grade, I try to find creative approaches to what I'm teaching.
Yeah.
Like I just redid all of my classes over the summer. I rewrote all of the Canvas shells, all the syllabi, because, as with anything, if you get stuck in a rut, you're going to lose that, like basically what you just said. You're going to lose that ability to come at something from a new perspective, to come at something from a new direction.
Yeah.
And the whole point of being a teacher is recognizing you don't have all the answers. Your job is to help students want to find the answers.
Yeah, that's so Noam Chomsky of you. That is
He is one of the greatest people that ever exist.
And I've talked about this on here before, but I had a conversation. I interviewed him once years ago in 2016, and he said that same damn thing. How, as a teacher, he got it from somebody else, but the point of being a teacher is not to cover things, but to help the student discover things. And there were times where I was like, dude, I just want an answer. Like I'm asking you, not what you think I need to learn, but tell me what you think, So it was there's a part of me that was just like, I get what you're saying, but teach me something, and I'll figure things out, other things. I've got enough in life already that I got to figure out on my own, just.
I like to try, just real quick, I want to pause for a moment and just like point out to the fact that someone who interviewed Noam Chomsky just compared me to Noam Chomsky. I just want to throw it. I want to sit in that for a moment because that feels really good.
Should I put some music behind this part?
But I totally understand where you're coming from, and I like to think that I mix it up like that when I'm teaching. Because I'm also probably one of my favorite compliments I ever got was from another colleague, like probably my second or third year of teaching. And he said, "You're the most overtly subversive teacher I've ever met." I'm like, "Yes,
that's a good one.
Yes, I am."
Nailed it.
And I do so when I do that, when a student will do, no, I just want an answer. I want the answer. That's what I want the answer. I'm like, well, I'll give you an answer.
An answer, right?
You need to find, but here's where I'm coming from and why. And the important part of that is to explain why.
Yeah.
Because again, part of that teaching is not just giving the answer, but getting them to understand how you arrived at that answer.
Sure.
So
I think that's the impatience in me, and at 50, you know what I'm saying? Like, I think in a way it matches the impatience of an 18-year-old, where it's just like, look, I don't have time, just I'm asking you a question, you have an answer, give it. But I on the other hand, I also completely understand and agree with what you're saying, and Noam Chomsky is saying, is that we have to figure out how we get to the answer too, because that's equally as important as the answer. That's hard to take in sometimes, but it's true.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
what are you going to do, right? Was teaching something you always wanted to do?
That's a very funny answer.
Yeah.
So it all started out as a joke. I'm going to be honest.
Many things do
Yeah.
in life. Yeah.
So, couple of things. It started out as a joke, and actually, my degree in English I arrived at by default. So I accidentally arrived at an English degree.
Nice.
So teaching, when I was younger, all I wanted to be was a rock star. That's all I wanted.
Were you reading back then?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
I was reading and writing very, very early.
Okay.
Like, very early.
Okay.
And like I think I was reading at 4 or 5.
Well, okay. So let's start there and work up to the idea of how you became a teacher. Because I think that path to get there is kind of part of this podcast stuff.
Okay.
So if you were reading and writing a lot as a kid.
Yeah. Well, I was an only child
Yeah.
in a difficult household.
Okay.
And music was my escape, as most of us who have been in that life know exactly what I mean.
It's interesting how the arts are very much an escape for that situation. But yeah.
And I started writing down the lyrics because, back in my day,
The
we
radio.
didn't have the internet. We had to hit pause, and
Right.
But I had a record player, so I had to like lift the needle and then,
Yeah. Yeah.
And so as I started doing that, then I started wanting to write my own things. And then, of course, I was big into comic books and monster movies. And so I actually, it got thrown away with a bunch of stuff. My mother, long story. But I had a book that I literally wrote they were like little tiny short stories about monsters coming out of the sun and shit like that.
Yeah.
But I mean, that was like 4 or 5 years old. I was doing that.
Yeah.
So like it was always in me. That part of me was always in me. And I always had a deep level of inquiry and a sixth sense for bullshit.
Yeah.
I grew up in a household where I was forced into a certain religion, and there were certain beliefs that came with that religion, and I saw the bullshit right away, called it out right away all the time. So I was already writing, I was already being inquisitive, I was already living like my life to a soundtrack.
Mm-hmm.
So it just naturally grew. And I started writing my own songs. I mean, granted, they were silly teenage,
Sure.
middle school songs,
Right.
but they were songs nonetheless. I actually found that folder recently and
Oh, did you?
had a really good giggle.
I love that stuff. Yeah.
There were, Mhm. She's every schoolboy's dream. Shit.
Yeah.
Anyway, so, but
I hope you put out an album of that someday.
there is one actually. The band. I was in a band. We have the recordings.
You have the record.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
oh.
It's-
you know what? I might get that from you and put that at the end of this episode. But
Well, funny story. Some of you out there, if you're deadheads, you know who John Cadlicek is. He was in that band.
oh
That was
yes,
yeah,
we've
yeah.
talked about this. Yeah.
In high
okay.
school,
Yeah,
we
yeah.
were in an '80s hair metal band together. That was John Cadlicek's origins.
Love
it
it.
was awesome.
Love it.
But that's a whole other story. So, anyway, growing up, and then I started getting into music. I was playing drums, and Kiss. I fell in love with Kiss and Led Zeppelin and AC/DC, and I was like, I'm gonna be one of them. And then, back then we had like Kerrang and Circus and Parader and all these magazines.
Right.
And Gene Simmons was originally a history teacher.
Was it?
Sting was originally an English teacher. And like I started seeing this pattern. I'm like, well, okay, so I'll be a teacher to fall back on when I'm not a rock star.
Right.
That was the joke. And then in college, I flipped majors all the time. I was like a math major for a while. Then I was a psychology major for a while. Then, I was checking out different things, and I was still wandering, trying to figure it out at one point. And my counselor was like, you're like 3 semesters away from an English degree. I'm like, what? It's like, yeah, you keep taking these writing and reading classes. I'm like, well, I like that. He's like, well, then why don't you just get this degree? I'm like, okay. So,
Yeah. Why didn't I think of that? But all right.
but it wasn't actually until college, my junior or senior year of college at Northern Illinois University, where I really, for the first time, thought to myself, seriously, okay, I can be a teacher.
Yeah.
And it was, of course, this. You always hear the story. It was a teacher who, it was one of the first teachers who wasn't telling me what I do isn't poetry, who encouraged me and who introduced me to this world of, he's like, have you ever heard of poetry slams? I was like, no, what are those? He's like, let me, and then I saw the first thing I saw, and I was like, that's what I do.
That's it. Yeah.
And so, and the rest was history. And then I was like, well, so this teacher helped me do that. My poetry is finally like something that is actually, quote unquote poetry. And then the rest just kind of took off from there. And then somewhere along the line, it turned out that I was actually pretty good at the teaching thing.
But you've taken different paths to get to that point, right? I
Oh,
mean,
yeah.
You were in the military for a little bit, like
I've been all over the place.
Yeah.
Like people, it's funny. I have friends of mine still to this day who I've known for, 10, 15 years. Like they're like, what? I didn't know that about you. Like still,
yeah.
because I just don't think about it. I just move forward. But yeah, like, I mean, I joined the military to get out of the house early. So I was like 17. I did the early joining thing.
Okay.
And then I just floated around for a while after the military. Ended up going to college, then dropped out, then went again.
What's the weirdest job you've had that was farthest from writing? You can say it. I'll put this one as an explicit episode.
I used to deliver ladies to motel rooms.
Oh, really?
In L.A.
In L.A.? Wow.
And this was before GPS. So
Yeah.
we had to, what was that book they used to have? It was a big map, like, of each neighborhood.
It wasn't MapQuest, but I know it was the AAA one. Was it with the ring binder?
Yeah.
I know what you're talking about.
And that was, it was something guide, whatever.
Okay.
But so I got to know a lot of the seedier neighborhoods in
Wow.
LA and Hollywood very intimately. And it was a very interesting, that was probably the furthest.
Yeah, but look, people might say that's a fucked up job, but I think it was an important job. And the reason I say that is because you have now experience that is part of your art. You can add that to a poem, a story, anything, and create depth and character and something that somebody goes, oh shit, I've never met anybody that does that before. So I think that's important stuff to hear about, to say, hey, look, sometimes we do what we got to do, and when we're done with it, we can use it for good.
I'm still working on that.
You're still working on that one? That's fair. That one's out there. Look, I was gonna say, I've served court summons. I've worked at a car parts recycling job. Breaking down the plastic pieces off of radiators out of cars. Lifting batteries and transmissions. And
oh yeah, not entirely different. I used to deliver auto parts for AutoZone.
Yeah, So like, I think these wide ranges of things we have to do while we're writing. In hindsight, I can say this now, but it's all part of writing.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it kind of adjacent to that question. One of the things that kind of dictated a lot of who I am really was my military experience, because I was communications, and for a brief time I was in military intelligence, communications for military intelligence.
Yeah.
And I'm going to date myself quite a bit here, because I mean no one else will these days anyway. But so
sorry, I'm taken.
Back in my, I know it was sad, but I had to accept it.
It's you got to move on, Barry.
But back in my day, we had, when I was doing this was when the internet showed up.
Oh yeah.
So my original job was radio teletype operator, and when I got done out of my advanced individual training, they were like, "Oh, by the way, we're going to train you on this now." And this was when the internet was exclusively military, medical, and for higher ed, for like 4-year college, for mostly actually used for postgraduate degrees.
Okay.
And so like there was no such thing as security. Like it was just open web, because we were the only people that had access to it.
Right.
And that was during the first Iraq distraction, and I learned a whole lot about what this country's really up to. And I mean, I always had my theories,
questions, yeah,
but like seeing it firsthand, I was like, oh, okay. And that probably dictated a large part of where my writing has gotten to.
Okay. Were you ever idealistic in your teens and 20s about what a writer is? And if so, has that changed?
Oh my God,
time?
yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I was a rock star.
Yeah.
I was like, my motivations were wholly and completely different.
Right.
I mean, I remember when I was in a band where we did get like a slight bit of notoriety. I remember we got paid to do this casino gig up in Baraga, Michigan, and it was a 2-day gig, and they gave us hotel rooms and free food and comped us like a bar tab, and like for 2 days straight we're partying in hot tubs. Women are serving us
Right.
Bloody Marys and bikinis, and I'm like, this is the life I want, this right here. And that was, and all my writing kind of reflected that, but there was like always that tiny twinge in the background, because again, goes back to teachers. Back before the GOP got freaked out about civics class
Yeah.
and took it out of our curriculum,
Right.
we used to have this. Back in my day, there's going to be a lot of that.
A
in
lot
this
of back in
podcast.
there. Yeah.
We had civics class, which was senior science survey. And I had one of the most amazing teachers in the world. For the first time ever, I read The Miseducation of the Negro. We read Johnny Got His Gun.
Mm.
We read One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And like, you want to talk about things that are going to radicalize you.
Right.
And then I went straight from that into basic training. So I mean, there was always that tinge was there. And then when I hit college full force, I started taking multi-ethnic literature and multicultural poetry, and I started learning all of the shit that we've been up to.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I discovered my Native American background. And then that went
that took you in another direction. Yeah.
So
Well, I want to actually let me ask you about that then, because a lot of the indigenous background has a rich history of storytelling, but it's vocal, not written. Do you ever struggle with that and trying to make a living as a writer too, or?
Well, no, because I'm actually pretty oral. Like that's even my.
Well, you're a
poetry.
performance poet.
Yeah.
But do you want to make a living as a writer, getting paid to make books or sell books, or?
That would be phenomenal, which
Yeah.
is also why I'm teaching.
Okay.
I'm
Alright.
teaching to pay for my poetry career.
Yeah. Okay.
Being a paid writer is the dream, man.
Yeah.
It is. And thankfully, in our new gig economy, you can accomplish it on your own. I
Mhm.
mean, plenty of people have done it,
Mm-hmm.
but you can't do it alone. You just can't. You
Right.
just can't do it
Right.
alone. Like if I had a media manager, I would be on a completely different level than I am now.
Yeah.
I mean, it
Sure.
really comes down to that.
Wouldn't that be nice?
And I mean, I do have, and there's definitely a very different distinction between my written word and the stuff that I do for performance. And I can do the written stuff as a performance, and I can do the performance stuff written, but it doesn't carry the same weight when it crosses. And you can do both. I mean, they're like Rudy Francisco,
right.
or there are a couple other Gil
Soto.
Gil Soto, Carla Cordero. There's a lot of San Diego poets that can do just that. But for me, I mean, I guess it crosses a bit, but I don't know that I would be happy just being a paid writer. I want to perform. It's who I am. It's what
Sure.
I do.
And I guess I don't ask the
know?
question to say one or the other,
Yeah.
but more of a, do you, is your focus on the performance part and the books will happen if they happen, or do you try to also say, I want to perform this poetry, but I really want to write and sell some books?
It's definitely the first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
For me, it's definitely the first. And it's hilarious because there's a Talah Macy poem called God's Work, which is one of the most amazing poems ever written, in my opinion. And it just nails it. And there's one video on YouTube that you can find where he does it, where he's being introduced. And he says, the person who's introducing says, there's some people who, do this and, they do it all by happenstance. It's like, yeah, I got a chapbook and it kind of sells itself and, da-da-da. But then there's people who do this, like they're on a mission.
Right.
Like Talam was, Talam and Rudy and, people like that, they're on a mission. And I'm on a mission too, but mine's a little different. Just that I can do poetry too. And I mean, I've been on stage with, Rudy and Saul Williams and Joy Harjo and, Taylor Molly. And a lot of that has happened by happenstance.
Yeah.
But I didn't really get seriously into like publishing a couple books until I did it on my own. And I like selling them out of my backpack. And my biggest issue is just I'm not going to play the publisher game. I'm not going to play the streaming game. Like, I'm not going to let you make more money off of my shit than I do, man.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
seems to be one of the only ways to do it, unless you really are driven and you have a good people around you. I mean, like Rudy has a fantastic relationship, and there are other people out there. Like when you have people around who are supporting you and helping you through that, you can do it. But when you're just on your own, it's definitely more difficult to do that for a living.
Oh yeah, for sure. You have to have multiple revenue streams.
Yeah.
But I think some of the smaller publishers, they try to make sure that the poets or the artists or whomever, they get something from it. Like it's hard because it's not a lot, but
right.
it's a good start. It's a good foot in the door or whatever, and then you have enough behind you to go to the next one and say, no, I'm not, that doesn't work for me. What about this? And you can maybe try to play that game a little bit, but you're right. It's less for you and a lot for them, unless you are already Joy Harjo or,
right.
These people that have that
Right.
clout, so to speak.
Which is, I mean, that's one of the reasons, like earlier when you asked about, the podcast and me listening to podcasts, I won't do streaming services. I refuse. I won't pay for them. I won't listen to them. I will never put my stuff on them,
Mm-hmm.
especially now that they've like recently changed the way they do things again. Like you have to get 1,000 hits before you even get a penny or something. Like it's ridiculous.
Spotify's kind of bananas about that.
So it's just, I would love to be able to do this for a living. It would be fantastic. But I'm also a realist. Like I'm closer to 60 than I am to 50 now.
Mm-hmm.
And if I could get to the point where my poetry pays for my vacations, I'd be happy.
Wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah. I mean, I've gotten to the point where like it's my vacations are all tax deductible as long as I find someplace to do poetry,
right,
and sell one book, and I'm good with that. But I mean, if I could just get to the point where like my poetry pays for these trips, I'd be pretty happy. Because, I mean, honestly, I really love being a teacher.
Yeah.
And I really love being in San Diego, so I'm doing pretty okay.
You're good with those.
Yeah, I'm pretty good with those.
Yeah,
I mean, I do
it's hard to
disappear during the semester because I am working so much, but
you're not disappearing because you don't like life. You're disappearing because you're enjoying what you're doing and you're immersed in it.
Yeah,
and that makes sense.
And I mean, I have past students who one just started his career as a public defender, one was a surgical tech.
Yeah.
And I had something to do with that, even if it was just a little bit.
A little bit.
Something to do with that.
Yeah, you move them along forward. Yeah.
So I'm pretty okay with that. It's nice to have a job where I can live comfortably and eat.
Well,
that's cool.
and you're not teaching stuff you don't like.
Yeah.
You're still in it. Your brain is still creative. That the creative juices are still there. You're just doing it for work because you also enjoy it.
Absolutely. That's the beauty of being a composition teacher. You can teach whatever you want.
Yeah.
You just have to teach them how to write about
it. Right. Yeah. That there is the trick. So I was recently putting a stack of books in one of those little free libraries down the street from me, and one of the books was a book of poetry, and I went to the coffee shop across the street and just checked. I was like, anybody want these? And I showed the person behind the counter, and she was like, ooh, poetry. And I mean, I don't know her well. She's super cool. A very cool person. I'm a big fan of Jasmine. But like that response is very common, it seems. What's your response when people do that? And do you get offended?
I sympathize with them. And I tell them, I'm sorry that you had teachers who traumatized you.
Yeah.
Because that's really what it comes down to.
That's where it started.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I can't, like I said, I had so many teachers tell me, oh, that what you do isn't poetry. That's not poetry. Yeah. It's like, fuck you, dude. Yeah. The bigger problem, and here, going back actually to the indigenous storytelling, because I teach that too. I teach I'm in the second semester of teaching first ever Intro to Native American Literature class at Miramar College. We're going to be getting Native American Indigenous Studies hopefully by next year.
I would totally take that class. I have a minor. I came close to having a minor in Native American literature. In college,
anyone who wants to take my class, you're more than welcome to take it. But one of the things about analyzing poetry, analyzing stories, like when we do literary analysis, we have these teachers who have the answers, and they're trying to make their students arrive at the answer. And that is not the right way to do it at all. And the thing about Native American storytelling and the thing about analyzing literature that we forget is that the listener, the audience, is part of the story. And that's like in storytelling in Native American indigenous cultures, they know that. It's part of it. They understand that. That's why some stories are told during some time periods, during some times of the day, to particular audiences, because different audiences are going to become part of that story in different ways. And what has happened, unfortunately, with the colonizer mentality that we have especially in our school system, is we're not trying to teach people how to think. We're teaching them what to think. And because of that, these students have been, the first 2 essays that I do in all my classes is unlearning them because they've been traumatized by their teachers. And that's the same thing with poetry. So when I get that response, I tell them, I'm sorry that your teachers traumatized you like that, but poetry is actually really cool.
Yeah.
Because instead of trying to figure out what it means, just ask yourself, how did it make you feel? Start there.
And that's kind of what the poetry is for, is how does this, it's to make you feel. It's to make you think, but it's also to make you feel. And I don't think, you're right, I don't think they're taught how to feel about it.
Not at all. They're taught how to tear it apart and,
break it
the
down.
way you looked at it was wrong.
I was told that in college. I was told that there was this poem we read, and I was like, oh, it's about this and this. And she's like, nope, it's about horses. And I'm like, what? Like, why can't it be about this? And it's just, well, that's not what the poet meant. And I'm like, well, how do you,
I know
the poet?
So 2 things that I have specific answers to that. The first one is that when I teach, one of the things that I teach about, whether it's literary analysis, rhetorical analysis, whatever, I tell them, okay, I'm not looking for right or wrong answers. What makes it right or wrong is how you back it up and prove it. Because if that's how you interpreted it, if you can prove it by what's there, but then you also have to answer yourself back to the thing that I said before about the audience being part of it, is that part of analyzing anything, whether it's literary analysis, rhetorical analysis, what are you bringing to it?
Yeah.
So like your analysis of that is based on your perception of something, and that could be different than the poet, but the point is what you got out of it is just as important. So prove that's what you got out of it by what's there. And the second thing is, so in my 205 class, which is Composition 2, Critical Thinking and Research Writing, the first half of the class is analyzing arguments. And so I have one unit where we analyze poetry for the argument, not for the poetry, but for the argument. What's the main point? What are they arguing in the poem?
Right.
And so as just an experiment once, I had them do one of my poems because I wanted to see.
Just to see what happened.
Just to see, right?
Yeah.
And it was interesting, some of the answers I got, because I'm like, no, I didn't mean that at all, but that's really cool that's what you got out of it. And that's the part of teaching poetry that we miss.
Did you tell them it was yours?
Oh, yeah, no, it's a video. It's a video.
It's a video, okay.
So they know, yeah.
Okay, all right.
But going back to the point that what your teacher said, well, that's not what the poet was thinking. Well, who gives a fuck what the poet was thinking?
Right.
Because here's what the person got out of it, and here's why they got that out of it, and that's more important.
Especially to the poet.
Yes.
Because I look, I can tell you what I meant, but I think half of the joy of writing it is hearing what other people think about it. When I had the comedian Greg Proops read a poem up on stage at one of his podcasts, and I was like, and the way he read it was different. And I'm like, oh, this is so weird, but it was cool because it was just like, well, that's how he read it. That's how he heard it in his brain, and that's how he's going to think about it, and to me, that's kind of the fun of writing poetry.
Absolutely.
One
of the best answers I ever got, because the name of the poem is Quotarian, and he thought it was this person interpreted it as a combination of quotations and barbarians. And I was like, that's amazing.
I love that.
I didn't think that at all, but I'm totally going to tell people that now.
Name of your next book. So we've talked about the responsibility of teachers. What do you think is the responsibility of poets to society?
To be honest.
Yeah.
Be honest and be true, and stop being in it for fucking egotistical reasons.
But how do we know when it's gone a little too much or too long or too far? Because we want people to be honest and be truthful. But is there a point where, there's a line has to be drawn. And I don't have an answer to that question myself. I'm just it just came to my head while
I don't. No. I think you, as poets, but actually just as bards, as writers, as bards,
yeah.
like look at the history of humanity. Like you go back 10,000, 20,000 years. You go back to the origins of origin stories, of storytelling, why it was created in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a responsibility, really. And I think that's where there's a big distinction in poetry or in writing in general, or in performing even, whether it be like a Netflix show or a book or a song, whatever, is we, much like propaganda and the way propaganda is used to steer things. I mean, look at Taylor Swift. Look at what Taylor Swift is able to do. Like she farts in a microphone and 10,000 people vote. And it's amazing.
Yeah.
And I love it. It's amazing.
Yeah.
But we have to understand that there's a responsibility to that.
Yeah.
And so as writers, I think we're responsible
Mm-hmm.
to be as honest as possible to ourselves and to others. But the difficulty comes in recognizing what's being honest and what's not.
Right. I think to further that Taylor Swift thing, example, I think what was really good about what she said is that do your own research.
Yes. Oh my God, yes.
Like that, she was like, I did mine. This is my choice. Don't base your choice off of my choice. Base your choice off of research, and that was, I think, because at first I was like, okay, she's going to tell him to vote for this. But when she said that, I'm like, thank you, and she didn't list resources. She didn't even say, go here, check this, do that. She just said, do your own research. And that's both dangerous and also smart.
Well, real research.
Right,
Yeah.
but we've lost the ability for real research. At this point, there's so much shit out there that we think it's research and it's propaganda or it's disinformation or misinformation or whatever it is, So, but that she said, do your own research was like, okay, cool. She's a teacher.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So that was pretty cool to hear. Have you ever considered quitting writing?
I can't.
No.
I literally can't.
Yeah.
Like that's, like I said, I started when I was like 4 or 5. Like it is in my DNA.
Yeah.
And and there's a poet and a dear friend. I think you met him while I was out here, Elemental.
Yes.
Yeah. And he has this thing that he likes to say when he introduces me and other people. He's like, there are some people who do this, and then there are some people who do this.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that's the difference between. And I don't want to disillusion anyone or persuade anyone not to follow what they want to follow. Like, do you, boo? But when the pandemic happened, a lot of people became poets.
Yes.
Because a lot of poets were going to online. So a lot of people, and
that's how we met.
Yes, and that's how we met.
Yeah.
And there's poetry has several levels, and poetry is for everyone.
Yep.
And there are different levels of poetry for different people. But then those are the people who were like, oh, I wrote some poems and then I went back to this, right? I can't do that. Like, there's no way in hell I can put down my pen. It just...
Have you ever tried?
No, because it's not even like...
It's like breathing for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's not even within my realm of concept to not be creating something.
So even when you were taking escorts to places or doing whatever, even when you're doing work that has nothing to do with anything creative.
Oh, that was when I was also an alternate on the LA Slam team. I was an alternate on the OC Slam team.
Okay.
That was my first run with the San Diego Slam team.
Got it.
I was actually there was a show down here back then called Downsized that I was in with Chris Benoit.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so I was still it didn't matter what. In fact, when I was delivering parts for AutoZone, I was writing while I was driving.
Yeah.
And I was the coolest thing was delivering parts and then hearing my poetry on NPR.
Yeah.
Like that was really sweet. That was
Yeah.
amazing. you know?
Yeah. How'd that happen? What was that about?
There's a show in Chicago, in Rockford, but it's a Chicago affiliate of the NPR show out there called Poetically Yours.
That sounds familiar. Are they still doing that?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's created, hosted by Yvonne Booz, who's an amazing woman.
Yeah.
She was like a big in the corporate world, and one day she just said, "You know what?
I'm done with that.
I'm done. I'm gonna go be a journalist for NPR now."
Right.
Like, yeah, dude. And she does a lot of really cool local stuff for Rockford, Illinois. And she created this thing called, Poetically Yours. And you can look online, just look up, NPR's Poetically Yours Rockford, and it'll come up. And she, it's people like her, people like you, people who keep this alive, that make it. I mean, we're going to be doing this anyway. I'm going to be in my living room screaming at my wall in poetry.
Right.
So I might as well do it online and in front of people. And honestly, my biggest fear is that, that Alzheimer's dementia bug is going to get me, and that's when I'll stop writing.
Do you know if that's part of your family background, or is that?
No. My mother's side, no. I don't know on my father's side.
Okay.
But I know that my memory is not what it used to be.
I've been thinking about that a lot lately, and I don't know if it's age or just all the weed I've smoked over the years.
Yes.
But yeah. Well, there it is.
It's both.
But it's both, yeah. But I've noticed sometimes it takes me just a little, it's like a split second longer to get the word I want to say,
Mm-hmm.
or I'm writing something and I'm like, oh, what is it, like that thing but one, and I do that.
Oh, yeah.
I throw out general words.
Welcome to my world.
Yeah, and it's I get that fear. I understand what you're saying, and that's why I feel so rushed to get it done, to find that level I want to get to and be at before that breakdown happens.
Absolutely.
And I take after my father's side of the family, if I take after my grandparents, which I think I do, I'm going to be into my 90s and just useless mentally. Like I'm just going to have no brains. So I'm going to live a long time, but in my 70s and 80s, it's going to...
I mean, if I'm going my mother's side, I'm probably okay.
Yeah.
If I'm going from my father's side, I've already outlived most of them.
Well,
so
it's a win-win for you either way.
Yeah, one way or the other.
One way or the other.
I mean, I never thought I'd be where I'm at now. So I didn't think I was even going to get to 50 the way I lived my life. So
as a kid, was you mentioned you wanted to be a rock star. Was there anything else that was not creative that you ever wanted? I wanted to be a firefighter. So and there was also a time where I wanted to have my own commercial advertising agency. Like
an actor.
An actor? Okay.
I mean,
so it's always in something creative.
Yeah.
It was never like...
No, it was... even like when I was... the first time I was ever on stage, I think I was 6 or 7.
Okay.
In junior high, in 7th grade, middle school, whatever they call it these days. When I was in 7th grade, I was in a theater class, and we did like 3 or 4 different skits that we did some shows, and I was like a main character in all of them.
Okay.
In 8th grade, the drama teacher had me taken out of, she worked it around, so I took a test so I could test out of my required algebra class so that I could be in the theater class so that I could be Scrooge.
Okay. Yeah.
So I mean, the stage has just always been a thing. I mean,
is that in your family background? Is creative stuff? Are you like one of the first ones to really? Because I know my mom is big on writing and reading. My dad loved music and played trumpet or saxophone or some shit. Or tried at least. He wasn't ever good at it, but so I had some bit of creative DNA in there.
There was always a piano in my house, but my mother never touched it. No, it was me. I'm the
you said
black
you're an only
sheep.
child.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm the black sheep, and I'm, it's no one in my family's even asked about my books. I think partially they're afraid to.
Yeah.
Because they don't want to read what's in it. I think is part of it, and I get it. I understand that. Like they don't want to
Yeah.
face a lot of things.
Well, I mean, but that was their actions and their
Yeah.
behaviors. You know, I've had that talk with my mom before. I said, look, you know, I'm a poet, you know, and I'm a writer, and I'm gonna put some shit out there. And she's like, I know. She's like, I know, you know. And then there's been poems I wrote where she cried, and there's been poems where she's been mad, and there's poems that she loved, you know. And it's I think she's always known me to be the one where my brother does one thing and I'm like, oh fuck that, I'm doing the opposite, you know.
Yep.
So like she's always known that, and I think over time it's allowed her to feel a little more comfortable with me putting things out there like that, you know. She's like, that's who he is, and I don't want to take that away from him.
And I mean, I will say this. While she never directly supported me, she definitely indirectly supported me.
Okay.
Like I was the drummer, and as much as she hated that,
Yeah.
she let us practice at our house always.
She didn't like it, but she
Right.
knew that's what you liked.
She would let me have parties at the house and have the band play as long as we stayed in the house.
Okay.
You know, she was like, okay, I'll buy you a drum set, but you have to take drum lessons, which was funny because I'd already been playing for like 5 years at that point.
Right.
But, you know, I did. So, you know, I'll give that, you know. But, you know, also I was the drummer, and she
Right.
wasn't very happy about that.
So there's no did she ever say you need to get a real job? Did she ever kind of push for that? Because my mom was always like, look, just have a college degree, or just have this, or have retirement plans, you know, just something as a background, because it's really, she didn't mention, she might have, maybe I didn't listen to her, but she I don't remember her saying being a writer or a musician or an artist of any kind is a really hard life. You know, she just said, don't do that, do this, you know. And I didn't realize until my 30s that that's what she was trying to say, is that, look, it's going to be harder than just getting a job, you know.
Right. You know, oddly enough, I don't think my mother ever did that, ever. Like, as far as my life went and my life choices, she tried to help me when I was making poor life choices about women.
Okay.
But she also was part of the reason that I was making poor life choices about women.
Yeah.
Which is a whole other story.
Thing,
That's
yeah.
a different
That's
podcast
exactly,
entirely.
Yeah.
But it was my grandparents, actually, who were the ones who were like, well, we'll pay for college, but you have to be a doctor or a lawyer and engineer because you're really smart. I'm like, well, I want to be a teacher. Well, why would you want to do that?
Right.
But of course, when I sent a copy of my master's degree to my grandfather, he was pretty goddamn proud.
Yeah.
So he was like, okay. You know.
Well, you know, look, our parents can grow too. Our grandparents can grow too, and they learn new things. And, you know, they don't just, when they hit 25 or 30, go, this is how they are the rest of their life. You know, they are constantly learning. Like, there's that meme that's like, you know, when I was a kid, I didn't realize that people in their adults were just faking it. They were doing the best they could. They had no idea, you know, like, so I've had to sort of adjust that frustration. And just say, look, my dad could have done a hell of a lot better. My mom was doing the best she could, you know. So there were mistakes, but she did I think a damn good job. My brother's very successful. I'm doing all right. I live alone out in I have a girlfriend here in San Diego. You know, I'm doing okay. You know, like, so I think that she did a good job. You know, but she had to grow and go through things, and I had to accept that she was still growing and going through things. So it's part of growth, I guess, as a human, not just a writer. Yeah,
absolutely.
So if you were in charge,
oh boy, shit would be way different.
I know. That's why I'm curious about this specific part of life. What would you change about how authors and just artists in general are seen and interacted with in the overall societal hierarchy? Like, where would you put artists in that list of importance if you could change it? Because I think, you know, we look at athletes or we look at actors, and, you know, we don't look at poets or you know, writers in that same vein.
I think that this if I was in charge, I guess I'm gonna actually readjust this.
Okay.
I'm gonna say if I had one wish,
Okay.
if I had one honest wish, that wish would be that every human being on the planet would stop, look at themselves honestly, and take accountability.
Hmm.
Because that would change everything. And how does that relate to the question? This. We hunger for entertainment to take us away from ourselves.
Yeah.
Which is why football is so big, which is why nonsensical music is so big, which is why the commercial scene is what it is. Now, the other part of that is that the people making money see that, and that's what they target.
Yeah.
So it's this chicken egg perpetual spiral. So if I could change one thing, it would be the people in charge of the entertainment industry would understand that enlightenment is absolutely an important part of it. And when they take the enlightenment out of the entertainment, that's how we get what we get. But again, if you look at the human history, I mean, that's why we had the gladiators. That's why we have cockfights. That's why we have dogfights. That's we have shit inside us. It's this constant for people. Okay, teachers. We always teach the 3 levels of conflict: man versus self, man versus nature.
Mm-hmm.
I take that all into one overall conflict: human nature versus human spirit.
You've done a George Carlin with it. You've just reduced all the 10 commandments down to 2. Got it.
And but if you really think about it, the main conflict for 100,000 years has been human nature versus human spirit.
Yeah.
Human nature's fucking ugly, man.
Yeah.
But we are capable of amazing things.
Right.
And that's where we see in the entertainment. And that's why, so if I was in charge, the one thing I would change is how we approach entertainment. Because while, yes, the stupid shit that has no substance is the most popular, there's a reason why reality shows with false drama are so attractive, right? We have this drama that we need to process, but we're not processing it. Instead, we're watching other people fail because of it.
Right.
So if we could change that dynamic, but then we'd have to change how it makes money. Then it's all of that.
Well, didn't a poet recently in the last few years win America's Got Talent?
Yes.
So do we want to? Is that the direction we want to go? Do we want to put poetry in mainstream culture?
Well, I mean, it already is.
Yeah.
In its own way.
Okay.
Okay. And it's just about refocusing it.
Oh, I see.
Right.
Okay.
But I think, I'm not saying, there's still room because there is ugly shit that we want to take a break from for a minute.
Yeah.
So everyone doesn't want, So like, for a perfect example, Shel Silverstein. Like, there's a poet who did that, but did it in a way that still taught us something.
Yeah.
That still brought us somewhere. And I mean, if you listen to his early shit before he did the kid stuff and his last book, ABZs for Adults, like he was on some really awesome shit, like all across the board.
Yeah.
So he was able to be enlightening and entertaining from a place that wasn't so intense.
Okay.
Right? So, and there's a place for all of it. But I just wish that people would recognize that using it as an escape from your problems instead of using it as a way to process your problems, I think is like the main issue that we have when it comes to our art.
Especially poetry, because we were talking about a little bit about this before we started recording. I think poetry lends, out of all of the writing genres, I guess, I think poetry is best for processing trauma, feelings, thoughts, all of that. I think there's something about it that allows us, I want to say this thought or feeling in a different way, but that makes me think about it. That forces me to go, what does that feeling mean and feel like? And then I have to describe it. But I think that can go too far sometimes.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Well, if it becomes about putting the trauma on display instead of dealing with it, it's gone too far.
And the art and the trauma there has to be a good blend of it.
Yes,
you know?
absolutely.
It can't be oil and water. There has to be. Otherwise, it's just. I don't. There's something about it that doesn't feel right.
Well, it becomes trauma porn.
Trauma porn.
Yeah, I mean it does.
Yeah.
It becomes trauma porn.
Yeah.
Instead of being, that the poetry. But I think for me and what I've noticed, and again, this, one of the things from the teacher, back to an earlier question, me as a writer, the more I teach satire, the more I see my writing as becoming satirical. Because I think from whether it be music, whatever, I think that poetry and satire are like the quickest direct highway to the human condition, right? And I mean, we've always had, since the first primate picked up a bone and hit a log, we have been spiritual beings that have music as a connection to that spiritual whatever it is.
Yeah.
But music, novels, short stories, these are all like the scenic routes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas poetry and satire cuts through the bullshit.
Well, what's
goes directly to it.
What's that line? Comedy equals trauma plus time, or something like that.
Tragedy plus time equals comedy.
Yeah. So I mean, I that makes sense. It's not necessary. You don't need tragedy,
right?
For comedy. But yeah, I can see what you're saying. Like those two.
And it's not just trauma and tragedy. It's just the human condition. When you think about the human condition, what we've been through, where we're going, how we do things, poetry and satire, because the purpose of poetry is to get to it.
Yeah.
And the purpose of satire is to point out the ridiculousness of it.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I think that's why poetry, at least for me, poetry and satire are like the most direct ways towards trying to find understanding of the human condition.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Last question. We'll go ahead and wrap up. If there was one poem, book, story, movie, song, anything creative you wish you wrote, what would it be?
Oh, God, too much to list. Way too much to list. Wow. I think you stumped me on that one.
Did I stump you?
I think you stumped me. Like, I know, like, there's always, every now and again, there's that poem that you're like, damn, I wish I wrote that.
I wish
line.
I wrote that.
Yeah.
That just had one line.
Just that one line.
I just want that one
and
line.
So I'm just going to go with the most recent one. Because that happens to me all the time.
Okay.
But the most recent one was the feature that they had at the last San Diego Poetry Slam. God, I wish I could remember his name. I feel really bad. But he had a line in it, something about let them stare at you because you earned that gaze. And I was like, that.
Yeah.
Right. So, and there's always like those, So
it's never one thing.
Yeah. But that's the most recent one. That line, I was like, yeah.
What do you get out of those sorts of moments or lines? Like, what do you as a writer, do you get inspiration, motivation, all of the things? Do you get something you don't expect?
I think one of the coolest things that can happen to you as a writer is to have another writer speak to you that way. Like, I think the two highest compliments that a writer can get are, I was inspired to do something because of you, which, I mean, that's like the gold star.
Yeah.
Like if someone's like, so the other day, my friend Olivia, she said, I picked up my guitar again. Like two different poets in San Diego poetry community have picked up their guitars because of me. And that's an amazing compliment. And I think the other compliment is when someone comes up to you, man, I wish I would have wrote that line.
Yeah.
Because as writers, it's that connection. There's a great essay by Leslie Marmon Silko, and we actually just read it in my class, that talks about writing and storytelling from an indigenous perspective is like a web. It's this web of existence, and we connect in different ways on that web to different people. And when everyone tells their story, that's the whole story. That's the whole web. And so when a strand of that web hits you from another writer, what you get out of it is the challenge to be better.
Yeah.
And the inspiration to be better. And, the more we raise the bar on each other, the more we raise the bar on ourselves. And that's how we all float to
It's
the
that
top.
rising tide thing.
Yeah.
Everybody gets better when we push each other to be better.
Absolutely. And that's part of why, I'm all about support, and I want everyone to support each other, but we have to be able to support each other in a way where we can also improve.
Yeah, I mean, it's not an attack, but what we also, as the writer, have to not take it so personal. We have to also remember that they're trying to help. We may not have asked for it, but take it. It when you get a critique or whatever from an editor or something, go, okay, well, I liked that line, but let me listen to what they're saying, and we have to have a little humility in that process.
The best workshops that I've ever been in are workshops that were directed by people who start out by saying, take what fits and forget the rest. And that's the whole point. That's when you as a writer, this is important. This is super important as writers. As writers, if we actually want to improve our craft, we have to be open to listening. We have to. And it's a delicate balance because we wouldn't be writers if we didn't have ego.
Right.
That's a part of it too. I mean, ego is something.
Don't you want to hear what I have to say?
And fighting with my ego is something I've been doing my entire life, know?
Right.
And that ego can get ugly sometimes. But we also have to understand that, if we want to do ourselves justice, we have to keep ourselves open to suggestions that actually help us improve.
Yeah. And that can be very difficult, especially early on.
Yes.
That can be very tough. So, Bear, this took too long to happen. So I'm glad we did this. Thanks for making the time today.
Thank you. Wopila, that's Lakota, for great gratitude, deep gratitude. I've been looking forward to this for a long time, and I know we both. I have a ridiculous schedule, and I know us trying to get our schedules to mesh up is not easy.
This is a Sunday morning. I typically don't record on a Sunday, but here we are.
And I thank you, and many of my students thank you for helping me get to San Diego.
I think we're all, rising tides, man. We're all better for it.
Right on.
Thank you.